The Blazing Black Dragon, ALATREON, has made its way to Monster Hunter World Iceborne, and with it comes new mechanics, challenges, and of course rewards. So I'm Darcblade with a Hunter's Guide to ALATREON in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now the aim of this guide is to provide hunters with a quick yet complete guide to the ALATREON encounter, providing you information on its mechanics, moves, and more. So strap in, as ALATREON does have a little bit of a learning curve behind it, but once you get past it, it can be considered a fun hunt. Now ALATREON, or ALATREON, however you like to pronounce it, is a black dragon, a derivative of elder dragons. Also known as the Blazing Black Dragon, ALATREON'S gimmick is that it's an unstable creature and has the ability to control all elements. So during a hunt, hunters can expect to deal with pretty much every single element in the game. However, veteran players may notice a few differences with ALATREON compared to previous games. For example, this time he will actually make use of water. In previous games he didn't. On top of that, there are also new other mechanics that we need to talk about that makes him different and of course more difficult. Lastly, returning hunters will also notice that ALATREON isn't really restricted in regards to using the elements. In previous games it had to be in a certain form in order to use the respective elements, but now it can pretty much make use of all of them. However, depending what form he is in, he can sometimes make use of one element more than the others, but he isn't restricted in regards to using the other said elements. Now when it comes to the mechanics behind ALATREON that players need to be aware of, first of all are the active modes. These are different forms that ALATREON assumes during the hunt, and they almost have a progression to them. The free modes include fire, dragon and ice. When fire is active, or when it's in fire mode, it will favour fire attacks above the others. When ice is active, he'll favour ice attacks above everything else. And finally, when dragon is active, he won't favour dragon attacks necessarily above anything else, but instead he'll use all elements equally. Now the structure of the hunt is kind of based around these active modes. You could almost see it as a flowchart. First of all, ALATREON will start off in either ice or fire mode depending on what quest or hunt you are taking on. After enough time has passed, he'll cast a huge dragon shockwave that will transform him into his dragon mode. After a certain amount of time in dragon mode, he'll go into his ultimate ability known as ESCATION Judgement, to which he'll revert to the next form, so it will be either fire or ice, opposite of what it started in, and then the process repeats. So say it starts off in its ice form. After a certain amount of time, it will then cast its huge AoE dragon explosion and then go into its dragon form, and then after a certain amount of time it will go into ESCATION Judgement Ultimate and then revert into its fire form. And then after again a certain amount of time, you'll have the dragon explosion, back into dragon, then into ESCATION Judgement, and then back into ice, and it rinses and repeats. However, there is another mode that players need to be aware of that is kind of separate to the various elemental modes, and that is flight mode. This was a problem in previous games and that, where ALATREON would become airborne, and whilst not too big an issue in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, it is still something hunters should be aware of. Of course you can knock him out of the sky through various techniques, but we'll talk about those a bit later. But anyway, let's move on to talk about the various attacks that ALATREON has. Now we'll go through these in order of element. So first of all, in terms of fire attacks. Now all of these fire moves can cause fire blight, so be aware of that, as fire blight will stick a damage over time effect on your hunters, draining your health unless it's cured. He has a standard fire breath that is almost like a beam attack that he casts straight ahead of him in a line. This hits hard but can't necessarily one-shot you. On top of that, another fire move he uses is where he fires a fireball at the ground, dealing damage, which then spreads out to cause 3 individual fire lines that will explode after a certain amount of time. This can be pretty easy to avoid, as they are clearly marked on the ground where the fire is going to erupt from. It should be noted as well, when he casts this, he'll actually jump back a little bit as well. The other fire move he'll do on the ground is he'll rear up and then fire a fireball into the ground, which will create rings of fire on the floor, which explode in waves, starting in the middle and working its way out. Again, this can be avoided as it is clearly indicated where they are going to explode from. Although remember, you don't always have to dodge or evade outwards, you can go inwards after the first explosion if you so wish. The next fire move is a move that he only really makes use of once he started to take damage, and which is a 180 degree flamethrower in front of him. Now this can hit hard, but it is avoidable with a leap of faith. Or better yet, should you be close enough to the monster, you can get either behind him, underneath him, or the other side of his head, to deal some uninterrupted damage to it. Now on top of these fire moves, Alatreon also has some fire moves he casts whilst airborne. These include again a straightforward fire breath move. He also has a continuous flamethrower move that he sprays back and forth in front of him whilst moving forward, very similar to one of Teostra's moves. He can also cast a double 360-degree flamethrower move in a circle around him, and then finally for his fire moves he'll also cast a huge AoE Inferno directly down onto the ground underneath him, which will then explode, and after which Alatreon will land. This of course does damage over time to anyone who's caught in the flames, and it eventually will explode, dealing massive damage. But anyway, let's move on to the next set of attacks, which are ice attacks. These attacks will deal Ice Blight if you are caught by them, which will increase your overall stamina usage. But anyway, in regards to ice attacks, it has the following. First of all is a straightforward series of ice shards. These go directly ahead of Alatreon, spearing anyone who gets caught by them. He can also cast a ice shard wave. This is more of a wider arcing move that has two phases. First of all, he'll fire out 3 shards in an arc in front of him, and then afterwards he'll follow up with a second wave, this time firing 5 off at a further distance. He can also freeze the floor ahead of him, sending out a huge icy breath. He'll coat the floor in front of him, damaging anyone who remains in the icy floor over time. It's not a hard hitting move per se unless you remain in the ice field. And whilst on the ground, he can also cast an AoE small ice field underneath him, damaging over time hunters who get caught in it. And then we move on to the more airborne moves. First of all, when he's about to take off, he'll cast a unique move where he'll take off the ground slightly, breathing ice into the ceiling above us, creating various icicles that will rain down on the battlefield, randomly hitting people should they get caught. He can also cast his ice shards that go directly in front of him whilst he's in the air. He can also cast the arc version of the ice shards whilst he's airborne. The next ice move he uses is a 180-degree arc in front of him, moving from his right to his left, firing off ice shards directly ahead of him. And the final ice move is something he can cast both on the ground and in the air, where he'll hover slightly above the ground and create a ice field directly underneath him, damaging anyone who's caught in it. Now when Alatreon fires off its ice-based moves, it can sometimes leave icicles on the floor. These, when hit by a thunder move, will cause them to start to pulse and glow, eventually turning red, and after which they will explode, damaging any hunter who's nearby. So always keep an eye out for them. So that's about it for the ice attacks that Alatreon has. Let's move on to the next element, which is the thunder element. Now when it comes to the thunder attacks, Alatreon can use these in pretty much any form. However, these can affect your hunter with Thunder Blight, which will result in your hunter becoming stunned more often. So it is highly advisable to definitely remove this blight. Anyway, in regards to the thunder attacks Alatreon has, most of the thunder attacks he uses are whilst he's on the ground. Now the first thunder attack he'll cast is very akin to Kirin moves. He'll cast various lines on the floor, indicating where thunder strikes are going to occur. These are normally on players' positions, so as long as you keep moving, you shouldn't be hit by them. The next thunder attack is a bit more of an AoE thunder ability, where he'll cast thunder strikes all around him. These thunder strikes appear gradually, arcing out away from the monster or towards the monster, with each glowing spot indicating where a lightning strike is going to hit. Again, these can be avoided, so long as hunters keep an eye on the ground. And one tip I can give you for this is after a lightning strike has occurred, you can quickly roll into its location, because for this move, lightning never strikes in the same place twice. And the final thunder move is a hard-hitting, strong one, but it is quite predictable and easy to avoid. Basically, Alatreon will leap backwards before raising its head into the air and causing a series of horizontal lightning strikes directly ahead of it. Should hunters be able to avoid the early ones, it will give you a golden opportunity to deal uninterrupted damage to the blazing black dragon. Now, like I said, Alatreon doesn't really make use of thunder attacks whilst airborne. However, it will make use of water attacks. Although this is classed as water, they are actually oil attacks. But nonetheless, they are classed as water, so they'll afflict a player with water blight, which reduces stamina recovery. So again, it's a blight that really hampers stamina users out there. But anyway, the few water attacks Alatreon have are all done when it's airborne. First of all is a straightforward water projectile that Alatreon will spew forth directly ahead of it. The next water move is a hosepipe that he'll continuously spray towards opponents left and right as it moves forward. The other water move it will do is a 360-degree water spray around it. The next water move is very similar to the arcing ice shard move, where it spits out a row of 3 water balls followed by a row of 5. The next water move he can cast is another 180-degree arcing attack in front of him, going from his right to his left, firing off in quick succession bolts of water. Now when it comes to the water or oil element for Alatreon, whenever it casts its moves, the water attacks will leave oil pools on the floor. These can be ignited when Alatreon starts using fire attacks that touch them, creating pools of burning fire. And then finally we move on to the last element, which are dragon attacks. Now most of the dragon attacks with Alatreon are its physical attacks, whether it swipes at you with its claws, tail, charges at you with its body. These are all classed as dragon attacks and will affect you with Dragon Blight, which basically nullifies your element or ailment. So removing Dragon Blight ASAP is essential for this fight. It should also be noted that when it comes to the Dragon Blight and Dragon Ailment with Alatreon, almost all of its moves have a hint of dragon behind them, meaning that almost any move can inflict you with Dragon Blight. Now there is one noticeable physical move that Alatreon will perform whilst airborne that is classed as a dragon attack, to which he'll slam down its jaw and forearms onto a player's location. So long as the player is moving, you should be able to avoid this. Alatreon can cast both whilst on the ground and in the air is this huge powerful dragon shockwave. You can clearly see when Alatreon is about to cast this by the dragon lightning effect appearing on the monster before it explodes. Now when it first casts this shockwave, it indicates that it is switching from either ice and fire to its dragon mode. However, it can still cast this after the fact, but further casts of this whilst it's in its dragon mode will not cause it to switch elements. You should also be aware that whilst the grounded version of the move is stationary, the airborne version of this move will allow Alatreon to track players' locations. The best way to avoid this is to perform the Leap of Faith to get out of the way. So that is about it for the individual moves that Alatreon can perform. Of course, one thing I should note is that certain moves are slightly changed when Alatreon becomes enraged. Normally this increases the aspect of the move, so for example, when he's performing the standard lightning strike move, it will cast 3 times instead of 2. So most of the time it just increases the number of times it performs a certain move by 1. So always keep an eye out to when the monster is enraged. But that brings us on to the next section, which is all about ESCATION Judgement, which is the ultimate ability that Alatreon has. Now he only casts this move when he is transitioning from his dragon form into either ice or fire. When he casts this, he'll run into the center of the arena, and after a brief period where sound is muffled and time almost slows down, he'll cast a huge elemental AoE that will continuously damage hunters for a small period. Unchecked, this is enough to kill hunters in about a couple of seconds. Now even though when he casts this there is an elemental effect, the damage is pretty much all the same. This is one of the biggest hurdles of this fight, as it ends most hunts for new players taking on Alatreon. But how do you counter this? Well, this links to the next section, which is the DPS check. Now during the 2 forms before the ESCATION Judgement, so either Ice and Dragon or Fire and Dragon, players will have this time before the ultimate is cast to deal as much elemental damage as they possibly can to Alatreon. Deal enough and meet this DPS check and the monster will topple. It will fall over, very similar to monsters such as Velkhana when you shattered the frost effect on the monster, or even Anjanath when you punch it in the neck whilst its fire is active. This will indicate to players that you have met the DPS check and you should be able to survive ESCATION Judgement. But it's still not a guarantee, because players will have to actually manually heal through the ESCATION Judgement with potions, Astera Jerky, max potions, health boosters and more. So when he's casting his ultimate ability, prepare your healing potions and get ready to heal. Ultimately it means that if you meet the DPS check, you're able to heal through the ultimate ability of Alatreon. But meeting that DPS check isn't always easy. So we're moving into the next section, which is talking about Alatreon's weaknesses. Now the weaknesses of Alatreon change depending on what elemental mode is active. When fire mode is active, it's weakest to ice, that is rated 3 stars, then water, which is rated 2 stars, and then dragon and thunder, which is rated 1 star. Fire is completely ineffective against Alatreon when its fire mode is active. When it's in its ice mode, it's weakest of course to fire, followed by thunder, then water and dragon, and it's completely immune to ice. And then finally when it's in its dragon mode, it's 1 star weak to every element except for dragon, to which it's 2 star weak to. So it's constantly changing, and you have to kind of place your bets when it comes to picking an elemental weapon to use. So ultimately, you have to ask yourself, do I go with fire or ice to deal the most damage when it's in certain phases, or do I want a more balanced approach by taking either dragon, thunder or water? This is a choice down to personal preference. Normally, personally, I feel it's a little bit safer going with water, thunder or dragon, but if you want to do things quickly or you're a speedrunner, then going with fire or ice is the best option. The biggest danger when it comes to fire and ice is that if you don't do enough DPS, there will be phases whilst it has the same element as your weapon's active, which means that you're going to be dealing no elemental damage to the monster whatsoever, resulting in a full ESCATION judgment. So you have to weigh up the risks for yourself and choose what is best for you, which brings us on to the next aspect you need to be aware of with ALATREON, which is breaking the monster's horns. Now, ALATREON'S horns are key to its controlling the elements, so players can use this to their advantage by breaking them to help them during the hunt. However, there are a few things you should be aware of. First of all, how to break the horns. Well, the horns cannot be broken whilst in fire or ice mode. It can only be broken whilst they're active in dragon mode. So whilst going for the head is still fine whilst in the other modes, as they're decent hit zones, you can only break them whilst they're in its dragon mode. But why do you want to break the horns? Well, like I said, they disrupt its control of the elements slightly. Should you break one of the two horns in its dragon mode, it will not be able to revert to the next mode in the elemental form flowchart. So hypothetically, if it starts off in fire mode, then goes into dragon mode, and then you break the horns, it won't be able to go into its ice mode next and will instead revert back to fire mode. So hunters can use this to their advantage, especially if they are using ice or fire weapons. So say you've got a team that are all using ice weapons, you're going to be doing a ton of damage whilst it's in fire mode. It will then revert to dragon mode, to which you break the horns, to which it will revert back to fire, and then you can deal that ton of damage again because you still have ice weapons. It goes back to dragon again, you break the second horn, rinse and repeat, and hopefully by that time you should have the monster dead, as you can only break two horns and thus control the elements slightly twice during a hunt. But that's about it for the key mechanics of ALATREON. Now, before we go, I just want to quickly go over some additional tips for hunters out there who may be struggling with ALATREON. The first tip I can give you is that Farcasters do not work regardless of if the ultimate ability is being cast or not, so they're a bit of a waste of space in your bag. The next tip I can give you is that Astera Jerky is wonderful when it comes to surviving ESCATION's judgment, as it enhances your healing capabilities. Basically how this works is that the Astera Jerky will refill any red health on your health bar, and as the ESCATION judgment only creates red health, it means that you can instantly heal your entire health bar for just one jerky, making it very cost effective. The next tip I can give you is to make use of the flint shot. ALATREON can still be flint shot, otherwise known as wallbanged, so you can give yourself openings there. Whilst on the ground, there are certain rocks that he can be flung into, and of course this is also a great way to get him out of the air. The next tip I can give you is that when ALATREON is using its various ice moves that create an ice field, then these are golden opportunities to actually perform clutch claw attacks, as unlike fire and thunder moves, they won't knock you off of the monster, and you won't take damage whilst performing the clutch claw move whilst it's breathing out its ice field. Another tip hunters should be aware of is that when it comes to mounting ALATREON, it's a very aggressive and fast moving monster, so prepare yourself if you are mounting the monster to grapple on and hold tight, because it can easily fling hunters off. Also, when it comes to dealing with ALATREON, blight resistance is recommended. Unless you're making use of certain skills such as the coalescence skill, you're always going to have to deal with blights with this monster, so blight resistance is strongly recommended. Also, when it comes to dealing with ESCATION judgment, certain specialist tools such as the Vitality Mantle and health boosters can make things easier when it comes to healing through the ultimate. And then the final tip I can give you is to try to make use of Feline Insurance or the Safeguard Canteen buffs. But there we have it, that is my guide for ALATREON. For me personally, ALATREON was a little bit of a learning curve, especially because things have changed from previous Monster Hunter games. Nonetheless, it is an interesting fight, but I can understand people's frustration with the monster. It does punish players who do not have the gear to make builds that have strong elemental DPS, so it's something not everyone can jump straight into. But then again, it is classed as an endgame task, so it's kind of to be expected. I do like that it brings elemental weapons back into the fold, as we've had kind of a meta that has been mainly blast weapons or poison and other ailment weapons, but seeing as the monster is pretty much completely resistant to most ailments, this monster shakes things up a little bit and gives more weight behind my argument of there being no one meta. But as we continue for the next few days, I'll be bringing out anti-ALATREON guides to help anyone who is having trouble creating builds to take on the Blazing Black Dragon. So don't forget to check back soon for that. But overall, what are your thoughts on ALATREON? leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a hunter's guide to Alatreon in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.